Hello and welcome to Behind the Paddle podcast. I am Porcelain Victoria.
And I am Emily Sin.
Yeah, and we are here today with
Kaytlin Bailey.
Thank you so much for coming on. Really excited about this episode.
Thank you for having me. I'm truly delighted to be here.
It's going to be so fun. Could you first just explain everything?
Goodness. Yeah. I mean, are we starting with gravity or like the theory of relativity? I'm kidding. That's not my expertise. So my name is Kaytlin Bailey. I'm the host of the Oldest Profession podcast, and I am here in Edinburgh with my show, Whore's Eye View, where I cover 10,000 years of history from a sex worker's perspective.
Wonderful.
Amazing. So can you tell us a bit about the inspiration behind Whore's Eye View?
Yeah, it's been a long process for sure. I mean, I've been obsessed with sex worker stories from history really for as long as I can remember. I remember reading about, the great courtesans of Europe, and it always struck me that sex workers seemed to really be an exception to the rule. That like women didn't have rights, right? I was like, what about these ladies buying their own houses and throwing parties and running businesses and stuff? What's going on there? And so like the bad girls of history have always been figures that I've been consistently drawn to. And so when I was in college, I actually wrote my senior thesis on the economic structure of brothels between 1890 and 1920, leading up to white women's suffrage in the US. And I thought it was really interesting that as sort of civilian women gained legal rights, we began cracking down on the freedom of movement of like sex workers specifically, but women in generally. Like, for example, during World War I for us, which started in 1917, which was later than for you guys. We're sorry about that still. But in 1917, the United States criminalized not just prostitution, but also promiscuity, specifically around military bases and specifically to protect soldiers, not from the violence, obviously, but from venereal disease.
Yep.
And so this led to tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of women, many of whom were not sex workers, being rounded up and subjected to these horrible invasive exams. And I was fascinated by this period of history and specifically how prostitution policy leads to almost inevitably a crackdown on the freedom of movement for all women.
Yeah.
Because how do you prove you are not a whore?
Yeah.
Right. And so, whore is one of those like loose and flexible concepts, kind of like, like witch or whatever, that has sort of come to mean like any woman that is making a man upset in the moment. So I graduated college. I got into politics in the United States. I got fed up with politics. I got into comedy. I got fed up with comedy and felt called back into politics, specifically, after Donald Trump was elected and after Sesta Fosta passed. And I sort of came back to the research looking at this history of eroding women's rights in the name of protecting us from our own choices, whether that's talking about criminalizing abortion or criminalizing prostitution or pornography or any of these other things.
Definitely. It seems like prostitutes have become like the scapegoat.
Yes.
For just, it's not really like PC to just out and out not want women to have rights these days.
Right.
So that's like the easy.
I mean, unless you're JD
option.
Vance, in which case you can just say it. Yeah. So after I started the podcast, every episode of the Oldest Profession podcast, we do a deep dive into a different sex worker from history. And this pattern started to emerge, right? Of like, if you go back far enough, sex workers, sacred whores, are deified. And then we are demonized, right? And that sort of, I believe that whorephobia kind of sets the foundation of misogyny.
Yeah.
And then the demonization narrative sort of gets transposed onto the disease narrative. And you see like misogyny kind of overrules a lot of scientific theory, right? We've done a lot of nonsense. And so and even today, this idea of like pathologizing sex workers or like false consciousness, or a lot of these ideas are derived from these much older ideas about women in general. And so the show is a combination of like that historical narrative, right? Where I tell individual stories, but I'm also telling this sort of like meta narrative of like Western civilization from a sex worker's perspective, mixed with my own experiences, and comparing it with my father's experiences, who was a soldier.
Yeah, that part in your show when it kind of got to the end, the conclusion just like a bit broke me. I was a bit sobbing. Like I had to take a moment because it was just, it really hit home. Like it was really well done.
Thank you.
I didn't say it last night. I meant to.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
It was so wholesome. Like just
It was really, really good. Really good. Really informative. And for me, at least, like at the end of it, it was like, oh, men are dicks. Like that was just a usual outcome which I had.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it's interesting because I think one of the takeaways from my show is like what misogyny has cost men. Like what my father is the one who was waking up in the middle of the night with night terrors and PTSD attacks, and everyone said that would happen to me from like making dudes come for money, and I sleep fine.
I can agree to that.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, like when we talk about trauma, so much of the infantilization of women, it's important for us to see that. But I really believe that like misogyny and chauvinism and like the gender binary or whatever has cost men a lot, and we just keep choosing violence over sex, and that is something that has really screwed I think people of all genders. Yeah,
absolutely.
I feel like that leads us quite well into the next question, which is how does the show challenge traditional narratives surrounding sex work and gender? I feel like we've covered this a little bit, but
yeah, sure. I mean, the dominant narrative, right, is that we are still very much living in the midst of just like a new iteration of the white slave panic, right? Like we really believe that the only people who do this work are literal slaves, either to some horrible violent person or their own addiction. And prostitution is still a very powerful symbol of violence against women. And so many people that think that they are against prostitution or against pornography, they think that they're doing that because they're standing against violence against women. But it's so important that we not collapse those concepts, because exploitation is gross across labor sectors. And gender-based violence is horrific, whether somebody is being paid for sexual services or not. And so my show, I really try to pull out those concepts and create opportunities for audiences to look directly in the eye of the things that we are actually standing against: poverty, exploitation, gender-based violence, but to recognize that people who make other people come, even for money, are not the thing tearing society apart. Yeah.
Totally. As one thing like I've really struggled with kind of coming into like our podcast covers a lot of topics, and it covers like feminism and stuff as well. And we've had to be really careful about who we are following within the feminist movement, because so many of them are so anti-sex work, and it just boggles my mind. Like it just doesn't compute to me at all, and I don't understand it.
It's so frustrating because this is a schism that goes back to at least the 1870s. With the I come from the U.S. and I know more about U.S. history, and I know that there are a lot of we've walked parallel paths, the UK and the US, but in the United States, some of the most famous suffragists, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, wrote Victoria Woodhull, the first woman to run for president, out of our history, because she was a sex worker.
Yeah.
And part of that is respectability politics, right? Part of that is getting caught up in the white slave panic and, standing, against alcohol, which they, thought was synonymous with domestic violence. And like, I see how they got there. But, and then fast forward into the 1970s, we see the same fight happen again, where mainstream, prominent, mostly white feminists made pornography a symbol of violence and exploitation against women and, put more resources behind trying to eradicate erotic labor than to protecting access to contraception. In fact, I think Catherine McKinnon is very famous for saying that eradicating pornography is more important than protecting abortion rights. And, fast forward 50 years later, we've lost access to abortion in huge swaths of the United States, and we are not living in a world with less pornography, despite their best efforts. But we are living in a world where it is harder for content creators to keep bank accounts, to have access to the basic technological and financial platforms that we all need to move our lives forward. But and just one last point. Sorry, it's my favorite topic, but you will not make somebody less vulnerable to violence and exploitation by taking away their livelihood.
Totally. If you limit someone's choices, you're just making it more likely that they're going to have to choose the bad ones.
Correct.
I absolutely understand that. One thing we're going to cover in future podcasts is most likely the Online Safety Act, which is just in the UK.
Oh, I'm not sure. Is that something that you guys are...
We just avoided passing the Kids Online Safety Act.
I think this is the same thing.
Yeah. So, which again, like so many bad policies, is sold to the American people of protecting women and children.
Like, kids know how to use VPNs. They're going to use
better than their parents.
Better than the parents are. Like, it's just nonsense. Like, so even with like taking the rest of it out, like it's just not going to make a difference.
No.
Yeah. You're not going to censor your way to safety.
Yeah.
And the fact is that we just don't want to look at the reality of child sexual exploitation, right? We really want this to be a stranger danger story.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the reality is that children are exploited, often violently, often sexually, by people that are already in their communities, right? Yeah, their family members, a disproportionate number of priests and ministers and religious leaders. Your children are not safe at Sunday school, but it's not having access to sexual images or consensual adult pornography. That is not where child exploitation is happening.
This is like the new violence in video games.
Yes,
it's
correct.
like the same all over
And
again. Why do we never learn?
Heavy metal music causes people to be violent and kill and murder and stuff like that.
Before we were panicking about rap, we were panicking about jazz. Like, I mean, it's like this goes way back.
Totally.
Oh God, are they going to hit Beyonce next? Like, what's happening?
With the way things are going.
Yeah.
Going back to the suffragettes and suffragists, that was one of the only women things which I was taught in history. Now, I was taught in England, whereas I don't know about Scotland or the US.
Probably similar.
But that was it. All I remember from those lessons were them saying how they would throw themselves in front of horses on the racetrack.
It was a violent and radical movement, which was great and inspired. We were inspired. The U.S. was inspired by the movement in the UK. And a lot of, there were, not a lot, but there were a few key suffragists from the UK that came to the U.S. and like helped inspire a generation that helped make it happen. I think we won those rights earlier.
Oh, you guys did.
Yeah, I think so.
I think there was more to a fight here.
Yeah, you guys. And then they were playing weird shenanigans where they were like, only women over 30 can vote. I mean, like it was like a weird game. Here,
yeah. That's all I can remember. But coming to your show, it was so more better than my history lesson. And I wish that we did have a section in schools where they would teach about women of the past and of the future and what it's all been like, basically, rather than this is what happened. They threw themselves in front of horses. It was great and everything.
It was
great.
I love it. Yeah, just one horse, and then they were like, "Oh, we get it now." Yeah.
Please don't do that again.
we got the vote and things, but it hasn't improved that greatly. It is still in the UK going down quite a bit.
Yeah, it feels like things are getting worse here rather than better.
Where is like reproductive rights, like access to abortion, contraception, medically accurate sex education? Like
medically accurate sex education, that's a funny one.
I feel like when we've put a lot of these issues are devolved in Scotland, and Scotland's actually can be like leading the world in some things, like in terms of we are now giving out free period products. We were the first country in the world to do that. Cool. But I think England's got slightly different.
Oh, England! England is a whole bunch of problems. Like it's great for sex work. It's okay.
Weirdly, it's better in that regard.
Yeah.
But in terms of
rights in Scotland.
Like I know we've just passed a bill that say like protests, like anti-abortion protesters need to be so far away from the abortion clinics.
That's helpful.
Yeah, like there is things actively happening that are positive at the moment in Scotland, but I don't believe that same bill's been passed in England, as far as I know.
Just to like remind, I think I know, but like I want to double check. The legal status for sex work is that it's like legal technically, but everything around it is criminalized.
So like solicitation,
advertising, working together,
all of that is illegal. But actual sex work in and of itself is fine. You just can't.
And what does that enforcement look like?
It just ends up getting taken on a case by case basis.
Right. Yeah. It's the whim of.
We had to look at some guidance that we were given from ECP about
English collective prostitutes.
Yeah. Again, this was advice for England, was it? For the police. And it was basically just saying that the two people working together rule should be judged on a case by case basis, depending on what the kind of situation surrounding it is. But I don't believe that's how it is taken a lot of the time. I think most of the time people are just getting arrested.
Yeah.
It's an absolute toss up. If you get honestly a good police officer or a bad police officer.
Everything's just too ambiguous.
Right. And police officers are not famous for their subtlety or social work skills. Like that's not the selection process.
No.
That's where we stand with rights and things currently in Scotland. It is really in the Stone Age.
And obviously they're looking at bringing the Nordic model in as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I heard that Scotland was sort of on the precipice of accepting that. And then also that there was this amazing poll that came out that 70% of the Scottish public is this is a bad idea. Please don't do this.
So there's I don't know if it's a consultation, but there's definitely people coming together to speak out against it at the moment. That's ending on the 12th of September.
Okay.
I will need to find where that is. But I will.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. We'll put it in the link for this as well.
Yeah, share that with me because I would love to share that with folks. I'd love to add that to the show to tell audience members to contact their representative, their
MP.
MP. Great. Yeah, thanks. Nailing it. Love it. So cool to be here.
Yeah, it's recently, just to add to this one last point, is recently last year in Scotland, they tried to put a cap on how many strip clubs they wanted.
In Edinburgh.
Yeah, in Edinburgh. And they came to a decision that we were only allowed 3 strip clubs in the whole of Edinburgh. That's it.
I think the 3 that are just all there together.
Yeah, the 40 triangle.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, cool.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Those 3. All right. They got to stick together.
And I believe it says if a sex worker herself from one of the strip clubs wants to open up her own, she can, but she still has to ask for approval.
Which will not be granted.
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So they're oh, we could, You'll see. You'll see. You'll
Right.
see.
Okay. All right.
And then what did we find out? Because it is very much a rabbit hole with missing rabbits, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
In Scotland, when it comes to sex work, because it's even difficult for lawyers to figure out what exactly are the laws, because
they don't make sense.
Yeah, it's that much.
They're contradictory as well, a lot of them. So
interpretation. So we in Edinburgh and Glasgow, you need a license to open up a venue. How much did we assume that license costs? A good few thousand.
Like 18 a year.
Yeah.
18 grand, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Not just 18.
And you can get denied. You have to apply for it year by year.
And so, it's impossible to build a business with that kind of precarity because you have no idea when the rug will just be pulled out from under you.
Totally.
And so that really discourages investment, it discourages taking care of the establishment, and it's like combining everything that's terrible about like a legal regulated business with everything that's terrible about a criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, it's like running a underground market, but with all the paperwork.
and still not listening to the people.
Yeah. Great. And so I know that like sex workers here in Edinburgh really came together to fight against the like strip club ordinances.
Yeah.
Did they win that fight?
Yes.
Great. Fantastic.
So that was the Sex Workers Union.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then what happened? Like were they able to hold on to their victory, or were more shenanigans pulled?
I think so. From what you were saying, I think they just changed the rules around opening more, but the ones that were there got kept because they were trying to just close all of them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was partial.
So it was kind of compromise.
Yeah. Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what they like to call it.
Sure. Okay.
A small one though. They got them.
When we fight, we often win because we are just right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
I mean, I know that I'm very biased, but like. It really is something that you can explain to people that have never participated in this work. But because of the stigma and the shame, it's very difficult for us to come out and advocate for ourselves because you're opening up a whole other can of worms, right? There's a lot of personal and professional like safety issues that come out with when you start doing advocacy. But when sex workers stand together and stand up against these ordinances, we are often able to convince huge swaths of the electorate that adult consensual sex work is like fine, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think because we went down to London to meet with the International Amnesty. We had a meeting, and a lot of things they said, I believe we were the only Scottish people there from Scotland. And a lot of things they said, it was very quiet in the way of like, why aren't people making a massive ruckus about this? Why isn't this on the news? And not a lot is getting shown or heard. Like we still need to make a lot of noise just to get our thoughts out there, which is insane.
Yeah. Like the consultation that I was talking about, I hadn't actually came across, which is mind-boggling to me with the amount of people that I follow. Like, not all of them are Scotland-based, a lot of them are UK-based, but I thought I would have seen something, and it took to being in that meeting to actually hear about it, and it's next month. And I was like, cool, this is worrying.
Yeah, do send me that information, and I will absolutely include it in the show.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can reach tens more people.
Yeah.
I'll do my part.
Thank you. So our next question is, what can audiences expect from a performance of Horror Review?
Here in Edinburgh or generally?
Let's go generally.
Generally, okay. Yeah. So I was, I've been a stand-up comic for 13 or 14 years, but this show is not stand-up comedy. It's a history lecture, right? It's a funny history lecture. It's a personal history lecture, but I'm covering 10,000 years of history from a sex worker's perspective. I blend that with my own, personal humor and personal storytelling. And I think the emotional heart of the show is this ongoing conversation that I have with my late father about what it means to be a soldier and what it means to be a sex worker. So I would expect a mad comedic dash through a lot of history that's coming from a deeply personal and impassioned place. Yeah.
That was really well said.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Here
in Edinburgh, I would expect to receive that in a really hot room. So if you have a fan, bring that. And dress in layers.
Yeah, it's hot here just now.
It's really hot. Yeah.
So, where else are you actually touring?
I'm taking the show to Oslo and Geneva and Tallinn. I'm also taking it to I should really have these dates like top of mind. They are all on the website at horseeyeview.com. It's been so much has been leading up. I mean, Edinburgh is the largest theater festival in the world, right? And so I've been touring all over the world leading up to this point. We had a fantastic run in New Zealand and Australia where I connected with some of the sex worker rights advocates that like made decrim happen. They have so much to teach us, I think, about like what is possible. I took the show to Iceland, which was fantastic. They've had the Nordic model since 2009, and it's not going great for them. They can and should think about like fighting for decrim. Well, the political party that enacted the end demand laws in Iceland are out of power and out of favor, and the Icelandic sex workers are organizing. And it was so funny because like I would do the show and then these civilian, mostly dudes, would come up to me and they would be like, oh, that's like, thank you so much for doing this history, but like you should know, like we don't really have any sex workers in Iceland because it's like too small a country. And I was like, well, that's weird because I met like a dozen of them yesterday. So there's absolutely sex workers in Iceland, and they are organizing, and I think that they have a really good shot of bringing decrim there, which would be very cool to see. And then, of course, I've been touring all over the U.S., which I hope to be doing a lot more of that in the upcoming years. But I wanted to meet sex workers that helped make decrim happen, and I wanted to meet sex workers that have been living under the Nordic model for decades, so that I could come back to the United States and tell folks what those systems look like. Yeah.
Has Switzerland got the Nordic model as
Switzerland, I believe, has the Nordic model. Yeah,
well, it's going to be an interesting show.
Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, and then of course in Norway, I get to perform in Norway. Yeah. We'll see. Yeah,
ruffle some feathers. It'll be
good. What are some of the key takeaways, messages from your show?
I mean, the most explicit policy proposal besides ritual castration is I'm kidding.
Really?
You have to see the show to get that joke. But anyway, no, the most explicit policy proposal is that the decriminalization of sex work is the only policy that reduces violence. But I think the larger ask of audience members is to think differently about the oldest profession and to change the stories that we tell about sex work. Because I think we've been so mired in, these dual narratives of, sex workers as either evil or, helpless victims or like the victims of circumstance. And I hope to reframe sex workers as not just active agents in their own lives, but also as major drivers in history. Yeah.
I feel like if we had the Nordic model in Scotland, there would be absolutely way less clients. Really way less. Because from being doing work in England and Scotland, there are, weirdly, in the UK, there's not a lot of people, client-wise, who want to hand over like their ID and things like that. It's very different compared to other places. Men don't really want to hand over all their information.
For sure. Nobody wants to be put on a stigmatized list, right? Which is why in the United States we have like this new trend of age verification laws for watching pornography. That's like really terrible. But I will say that where the Nordic model has been implemented in the past, you see a temporary decline in clients and a disruption of the economy, which throws, sex workers into desperate situations. Yeah. But long term, you don't see a reduction in demand. It doesn't achieve the stated goals. Yeah.
Totally. So this is quite a big question, but how do you envision the future of sex work? Like, is there any patterns or trends that you're kind of seeing?
Yeah. I believe that we are at a critical turning point because technology has enabled sex workers to connect all over the world. And the movement, the sex worker rights movement has always been global, right? From the first World Whores Congress in 1986 to the, International Whores Day has always been international, going back to 1975. And sex workers have always been connected, right? Because we travel, we talk, we hang out. But the ability for us to, in real time, build relationships, share information across borders has, I think, strengthened our movement. And there are more and more of us who are coming out, who are owning our identity as sex workers and are pushing back against this, old, stubborn stigma. And so I think that sex workers are where the LGBTQ movement was in the 1960s, right? We live in a world where everyone already knows a sex worker. They just don't know that they know them yet. Yeah. And I think that is changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Yeah.
I mean, I hope it gets better.
And I believe that, sex workers can do a lot. We have so much to teach the world about shame and sex and mental health and negotiating boundaries. I think that all of our communities are better served in a society that enables sex workers to share our wisdom with the communities that we're already a part of. And we are already everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, even somebody who sells like feet pictures or something, it's part of sex work. But even something as simple as that is still shame to this day, sadly. Sure. So hopefully it does get better, the stigma and things. We'll see, especially in Scotland.
Yeah.
Have you received any backlash or anything due to your show?
I will say that, the title Whore's Eye View, it's a pretty self-selected audience, right? Yeah. Like people know what they're asking for. I get pushback mostly from Nordic model feminists, right? Who really have a difficult time, I think, imagining themselves doing this work. But I think it's really important to remind people that like you don't have to love your job to have rights, and like not all work is for everyone, right? Like I, for example, could never work in a slaughterhouse. Like I could never do that. I was also a terrible waitress. Like not, we can't do everything, but just because you yourself can't imagine doing a particular job doesn't mean that outlawing or criminalizing that work helps anybody in it. So I think the biggest opposition are people that identify as feminists who have really internalized the narrative that prostitution is a symbol of violence against women. And my show is really for them in a lot of ways. Like I speak directly to well-meaning feminists that are genuinely trying to help. And I ask those folks to look at the research, right? There's a reason that the World Health Organization and Amnesty International and the United Nations focus group on women and girls supports decriminalization. And it's not because they are like funded by the sex industry. Yeah.
I forgot what I was about to say. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy with how people say they're feminists, but they have their own ideas and views on how they want the world.
And specifically women, right? There's been an unfortunately long legacy of women or people who are declaring themselves to be feminists, spending their energy trying to coerce other women into making different choices.
Yeah. I see that a lot, mainly on TikTok in the US with like abortion clinics and things like that. I feel like that's more there in the US than in Scotland, where you'll get a large amount of people protesting for like abortion and things like that, and trying to persuade the women not to do stuff.
Yeah, the crisis pregnancy centers are horrific, and they, they're built on misinformation. They target women in desperate situations. They explicitly lie to them, don't provide them, with any kind of medical care. But there's a lot of propaganda around trying to bully women into having children that they don't have the resources to raise, and in many cases don't want.
Yeah, which is fair enough. I'm fully for the my body, my choice.
Sure. I mean, I do think it's important, when we're talking about reproductive justice, like it can and should be easier to raise a child in the United States.
Absolutely.
And it is a tragedy when somebody has an abortion just because they're poor or they don't have the resources to raise a wanted child. But forcing people to carry pregnancies to term is not how we achieve that vision.
No, absolutely. It's like I was discussing with you a few days ago. Like I have a child, so and I want to grow that family, but you only get, I think it's 500 a month maternity. It's like how are you meant to live off of that?
Right.
It's really like, for me, at least, it pays like one of my bills, and that's it.
Right.
So it's just, I can absolutely understand that in the economy that it is, that people just have to think about that. And I find that really, really sad and devastating that their own country just cannot provide for them.
Sure. Yeah, especially since, ostensibly we all have a shared interest in getting the next generation the basic resources that they need to be like, not just like contributors, right, from an economic standpoint, but like I want to live in a society where everyone has access to like food, water, shelter, education, basic medical care, right? We just survived a global pandemic. If we don't realize that like all of our health and wellness is connected.
Yeah, like we want everyone to thrive, not just survive.
Yes. Absolutely.
Talking about actually thriving, surviving, right now in England there are riots. Which I guess if you want to pick on certain people, it's not the society the next generation wants to live in, I would say, especially with how outrageous it is with the economy, how much things are costing, different political people in power, different laws that are coming in.
Like it's just another example of like a scapegoat being used.
Of course.
What is really a poverty issue. And
right, absolutely. Yeah, the problem is poverty, right? It's not immigration, it's not prostitution, it's not people practicing a religion that's different than the religion that you would like them to practice. I mean, it's so interesting that we keep making this mistake over and over again. It seems very easy for the people with the actual power, right? People who are hoarding wealth to point to other groups of poor people and be like, they're the problem.
Well, we need to, or
right.
Anyway, I think that's about us. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been amazing.
Yeah, and thank you so much for coming to see the show.
It was good.
Thanks.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank
It
you.
was so good. It was really, really good.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if you recorded it, oh, so good. So good. Just every bit of it, and the history and the personal dialogue as well was really, really good. It made it so great.
And so hard hitting because it just wove so much.
Yeah.
Like,
Thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
But yeah, it's been amazing having you on. We are very appreciative.
Truly delighted and honored to be here.
So yeah, if you want to plug anything in, you are more than welcome.
Sure. I mean, we are right now recording our 6th season of the Oldest Profession podcast, where every episode we do a deep dive into a different sex worker from history. So if you would like more of me talking about history, that is 5 seasons of that are currently available for you. And make sure that you subscribe to the podcast so you hear when the 6th season drops. We also have a newsletter where we do a roundup of sex worker rights related news from all over the world. And so you can sign up for that at oldprosonline.org.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. This has been Behind the Battle with Paulson Victoria.
I'm Emily Sin.
Yeah, do you want to do your shop?
Yeah, so as always, we've got a little discount code for you guys. If you use Behind the Paddle at thesanctuaryofsin.com, you'll get a 10% discount off my shop.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, everywhere where a podcast should be. And yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.